I want to first talk about a letter I sent today to the NTSB, the chair, regarding the dangerous and wanton acts, folks. I sent a letter to the chair of the NTSB regarding the dangerous and wanton acts of corporate greed in the rail industry. Though I'm glad to hear the NTSB is investigating the devastating derailment in Ohio, they can't stop there. For years, freight rail companies have lobbied to loosen regulations, neglect safety upgrades, lay off workers. In fact, over the past 5 years, there have been 26,500 accidents and incidents. Worse, 2,768 fatalities, and over 30,000 employees cut. 20% of the workforce has been cut. That's not just negligent. It's dangerous. It's life-threatening, as we saw in Ohio. So I've asked the NTSB to investigate all 7 of the Class 1 freight railroad companies and issue findings, recommendations, and regulations to improve safety, to investigate BNSF, CSX, Union Pacific, Canadian National, Canadian Pacific, and Kansas City Southern. And I've asked the chair to answer a number of questions. What specific regulations and standards are needed to provide the utmost safety to the rail industry? How have deregulatory pushes contributed to these derailments and increased deaths? And right now, local communities are only notified of hazardous trains coming through if they have a certain number of cars or a specific type of hazardous substance. Is that too narrow? Can we expand this to give more transparency? I need answers. We all need answers. America needs answers to these questions so we can make meaningful change in the rail industry. One other point on H.R. 1 before I get to AUMF, where my colleagues will speak on at length. Today, House Republicans rolled out a partisan, dead-on-arrival proposal to address America's energy needs that they had the nerve to name H.R. 1. H.R. 1 will lock America into the most expensive and volatile, dirty sources of energy, will set America back a decade or more in our transition towards clean, affordable energy. The package is a wish list for big oil, gutting important environmental safeguards on fossil fuel projects, while doing none of the important permitting reforms that would bring transmission and clean energy projects online faster. Transmission is vital to getting green energy from where it's produced to where the people are, and they don't have the kind of transmission reform, any modicum of it, that is needed. Any serious permitting package must also focus on the needs of the future as America transitions to clean energy. We need to take steps in Congress to ease that transition, ensure that clean energy is reliable, accessible, and most of all, affordable. That includes efforts to expedite onshoring and construction of industries critical to our national security, like we did in chips and science. Permitting reform is an essential step in laying the foundation of the energy future. Thankfully, there are Democrats and Republicans talking in both houses to permit a deal forward. We need a bipartisan, bicameral effort on permitting reform, and I would do everything I can to get that to happen. Finally, on the AUMF. Yesterday, we took the first step to officially repeal the AUMF of 1991 and 2002, and tomorrow we will vote on cloture. Americans are tired of endless wars, and thanks to the folks here with me, this is the week the Senate will begin the process to end the legal authority that started the Iraq War 2 decades ago. March 19th will mark the 20th anniversary of that invasion. The Iraq War has been over for more than 10 years. The reality on the ground has long since changed, so laws on the books must change too. This was a bipartisan effort, and I just want to thank the people here. Senator Kaine has been relentless. This has been a passion of his. We tried to get this done last year in the NDAA, but people wouldn't let it happen. But he has been relentless. Senator Menendez has worked the committee very well, so it passed out by a 13-8 bipartisan vote. And that's why we're very optimistic it will get the 60 votes it needs. And Senator Duckworth has so strongly represented veterans and heroes who have risked so much for us. So it's a great team to elaborate on AUMF. Senator Menendez.
Well, thank you, Mr. Leader. Look, as senators, our gravest responsibility in our position is deciding when to authorize the use of military force. It's a decision about life and death. It's a decision about sending our sons and daughters into harm's way. Congress authorized the use of such a force in 1991 and 2002 against Iraq, decades ago. Now, I personally am proud to have voted against going to war with Iraq in 2002. I think history has proven that was the right call, but that's not the question that will be before the Senate tomorrow and next week. So in a world where these authorizations no longer make any sense or serve any purpose that Congress could have intended, we're moving forward with their repeal. I want to join Senator Schumer in commending Senator Kaine, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who has been driving this issue along with Senator Young for the better part of several years now, and has now brought it to maturation that we're hopefully going to have some good success next week. And Senator Duckworth, who has now joined our committee as well, and we're thrilled to have her history, her expertise, and her insights on issues like this and others. The Iraq of 2023 is far different than the Iraq of 1991 or 2003. Saddam Hussein has been dead for 2 decades. The U.S. is no longer an occupying force in Iraq. We are partners with the Iraqi government and people in an important strategic relationship, cooperating on everything from health and energy and climate to protecting American personnel and assets in the region to counter the threat from Iran. Repealing these outdated authorizations reflects that reality, and it will ensure that they are not abused by future administrations. Now, some will ask whether repeal of the authorization impacts our ability to protect the nation against Iran. Take it from me, as someone who has worked for a couple of decades to confront the challenge of Iran, this will have no impact on defending against any Iranian threat. The President already has authority under the 2001 AUMF and the Constitution for military operations against ISIS or Iranian-backed groups that threaten U.S. personnel. The AUMFs that we are repealing add nothing to those efforts. So we stand on the brink of history. As Senator Kaine has said, it's been decades since we ever repealed an AUMF. We're asserting congressional responsibility not only to declare war, but to finally end those that no longer need this authority. With that, let me turn to Senator Kaine.
Well, thanks to my colleagues, and I want to thank Senator Schumer, who, when we first got this bill out of committee in the last Congress, promised me a floor vote, and then circumstances conspired against us, but his promise didn't have an expiration date on it. And he said when we started into the 118th Congress, keep working and we'll do this. The Iraq War resolution was passed in October of 2002. I was the Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, had no interest in being ever in the United States Senate, and certainly didn't know that I one day would be. At that time, I had no idea that my 12-year-old son, oldest son, would become a Marine infantry officer. But I listened to that debate about the Iraq War, and it infuriated me. It infuriated me that it was being forced on Congress right before a midterm election. The invasion didn't start till March. There was nothing about that debate that was sort of according to Hoyle. There was no reason it should be put into a midterm election context, but that's what happened, and it so angered me that when I eventually got elected to the United States Senate in 2012, I fought to get on the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee so that I could work with colleagues to try to get Congress to take more seriously the grave responsibility in Article 1 that we shouldn't go to war without a vote of Congress. Iraq is no longer an enemy. You followed, Secretary Austin was there last week, a very productive meeting with Prime Minister al-Sudani to talk about the work we're doing with Iraq to continue to battle against ISIS and other non-state terrorist organizations, to check Iranian aggression, to promote regional stability. There's no reason to have a war authorization against a nation that is now a security partner. So after 20 years, it's time to repeal this and show again that Congress can exercise that Article 1 muscle. There's more to do in this space, but if we begin with this repeal and then hopefully with a good bipartisan vote, send a message that can gain some momentum in the House as well, where we have very broad bipartisan sponsorship. Congress can start to take back this power that is the most sacred one we have and that we should jealously guard. Let me now introduce my foreign relations colleague, who is a warfighter and a hero and a superb senator, the senator from Illinois, Tammy Duckworth.
Behind you here. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. You know, in 2012, I first started talking to Senator Kaine about this because as he was being sworn into the Senate, I was being sworn into the House and onto the House Armed Services Committee. And I wanted to talk about ending the AUMF because I think it is the best way that we can support our troops. Look, most people run away from battle, but our service members run toward it. They watch their brothers and sisters get wounded. They miss births and funerals, school plays, and college graduations. Then they come home bearing the wounds of war, both visible and otherwise. They will always do their job, our servicemen and women, defending our country, no matter the sacrifice. So they deserve to know that they have the moral support and most current legal backing of this nation. But for more than 20 years, Washington has failed to give them that. One of Congress's most solemn duties is deciding when and how we send Americans into combat by debating and passing authorizations for the use of military force. These documents set the legal framework for military action that are supposed to define the mission for the Americans who are going downrange. But lately, too many in these halls of power in Washington have shrugged off that duty, hiding behind this outrageously outdated document. They've been scared of the political risks that come with bringing these wars back into the spotlight. They've been staring down election days. Congress has shirked its responsibility to our troops. For more than 20 years since passing these AUMFs, those in power have stretched and skewed their original intent. We've left our troops without a clearly defined mission, without clearly defined parameters, without an off-ramp. So now they face an increasing risk that a future commander-in-chief may improperly interpret the law to send them into future armed conflicts that this AUMF was never intended to authorize. Our troops deserve better than that. If we choose to send the finest among us into battle, then we need to debate and vote to do so based on current conditions. Enough of being more worried about political consequences than about our troops in harm's way. And until we muster up the courage in these halls of power to ask and answer the tough questions that will actually tell our troops what they're fighting for, we will not be living up to their sacrifices. Instead, we will be leaving them in an endless loop, refusing even to look for that off-ramp. Look, it really shouldn't be that hard. Anyone who claims the mantra of patriotism can't keep demanding such sacrifices from our service members while refusing to step up to our obligation, our responsibility, to have a public debate and vote when we ask our troops to go into combat. It's time, it's long past time, that we repeal this decades-old AUMF and start honoring the troops in the way that they deserve, maybe with a little courage ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Tammy. Okay, question.
Senator Schumer,
yes.
Do you support the Senator Warren bill to push back the deregulation of Dodd-Frank?
Okay, we need strong legislation, and hopefully we can put something together that's bipartisan. Yes.
Does anything about this crisis with SVB and other banks, does that concern you in the way that things were in 2008? And does that spook members in trying to figure out what is the right course of action in these circumstances?
Well, look, I have faith in President Biden, Secretary Yellen, and the Federal Reserve. They have all hands on deck to manage this and keep our economy sound.
What about
yes.
Congress?
I heard you talking about HR1, clean energy. Do you agree with President Biden to see the green light the Willow oil project, the drilling project in Alaska?
Look, the bottom line is that this HR1, as I said, is a bill just for the oil companies. It doesn't deal what we need for clean energy, and we need to get something done better. Without transmission, all of it isn't going to matter. Yes?
Schumer, are you worried that regional banks are losing deposits to big banks, and should there be unlimited guarantees of bank deposits in order to prevent these deposits from fleeing the smaller
Well, as I said, we need strong legislation, and hopefully we can get something bipartisan done. That's what our goal is.
Senator,
yes?
on the Silicon Valley bank failure, did the San Francisco Fed make a mistake or miss an obvious problem here? You're a former member of the Senate Banking Committee. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, look, we need a thorough investigation as to what went wrong and hold those responsible accountable. Last one over there. Yeah.
Republican leaders are asking for amendment votes as part of the AUMF repeal bill. Do you expect that you'll have to give those to them to get on the bill?
We expect to have amendment votes, and we're going to work together. Senator Menendez will work with Senator Risch and Senator Kaine and Senator Young so that we can have some amendment votes. Yes. Thank you, everybody.
No comment on Aaron Rodgers to the